do you know Jacob Collier? Do you know who he is?
I've
He's a
heard of him,
musician.
yeah.
He's just a genius, and I love who he is. I love what he does with his music. But he said, I heard him say recently, everybody wants to be cool, but I want to be warm. Why be cool when you can be warm? And I thought, yeah, like lean in, open your heart, be the safe landing place for a person. They're not in the thick of it. They're not still speaking from the wound. They're speaking from the scar. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but so finding your people, I think, and you only really need one other person to be a witness, to be an unbiased witness, to maybe offer some wisdom. So it's actually a practical place to practice what we're talking about, this building this muscle, this capacity to sit with what's uncomfortable, to be present to another person, to be present to whatever's coming up for us. So I think the best thing they can do is to tune into their own knowing. The answers are always within us, and sometimes it takes a guide to ask good questions. But I think as soon as someone starts sort of telling you this is the way it needs to be done, or this is the formula you need to follow, it's probably not the right guide.
Because it's a choice. You chose to leave. There's no grief here. Well, I'm telling you, listeners, and who's ever in my bit, like if you left, there can be a lot of grief still. So when you've gone through type of a separation or divorce, the way that you view the world has changed, right? So that's just my thinking, that if people, instead of people looking at it as a failure, look at it as in, I see the world differently now, but I've learned from that.
I think for the last 10 years, most people have come to me for ceremony work, and it's usually not for separation and divorce. It's for one of the big 3 or 4: birth, death, marriage, baby. Because those are the ones in a largely secular society, or I would say most of my clients are secular or maybe spiritual, but not religious. Those are the things they still think about ceremony and ritual for.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Just Separated podcast. I'm Karen Oman, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I help people navigate the emotional, legal, and practical challenges of divorce, including high conflict and narcissist relationships. Each week, I am joined by expert guests to share guidance, tools, and strategies so you can move forward with clarity, confidence, and resilience. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many layers of divorce. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Welcome to the Just Separated podcast. I'm your host, Karen Oman, co-founder of Divorce Workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about the ritual of letting go and how we move through the invisible losses of separation. And our expert guest today is Karla Combres. Karla is a legacy guide, celebrant, and workshop facilitator who supports individuals and organizations through life transitions, including experiences of loss, identity change, and uncertainty. She works with people to reflect on meaning, reclaiming their stories, and navigating pivotal moments such as separation with presence rather than performance. Karla's approach combines storytelling, deep reflection, and experiential practices to help people build the capacity to stay with what's true, be witnessed in community, and integrate change over time. Her work invites people to live fully and meets life's inevitable transitions with honesty, clarity, and intention. Welcome, Karla, to the Just Separated podcast.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me.
So, Karla, most people think legacy is something that happens at the end of life. As a thanatologist, I know that well. But you talk about the living legacy. So for someone listening who feels like their divorce has tarnished their life story or made them feel like a failure, how can they start building a living legacy today, right in the middle of the mess?
Well, I came to this notion of legacy after years of working with people through various milestones. And, early on, I was focused on helping people mark that one particular event. And it quickly became clear to me that the more intentionally we meet whatever it is on our path, the more we can integrate the lessons and carry it forward into whatever comes next, because we will inevitably meet hardships, loss, have accomplishments, all of the mess and wonder of being human. And that's where I think it ties into legacy, that it's an active thing. It's not something we just leave behind. It's something that we shape. And so separation and divorce is one of those moments, one of those difficult moments that present an opportunity to to learn something from it, to be intentional about what we want to take from that experience, what we've learned, to maybe not turn our backs totally to what it has offered us. There might be beautiful parts that we can take with us going forward, and choose how we want to meet what comes next. So I'd say that's how I would tie that into the legacy piece.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned before we start recording that, for many of us in divorce, I think society, when we get divorced, we do tend to feel like we didn't live up to any legacy, right? We got married, most of us in a church or some faith, spiritual, whatever, and we kind of feel like we betrayed that bond or that whatever. So what are your thoughts on when people bring that heavy sense of failure into these discussions that you have with people that are going through divorce, and they're trying to figure out their legacy, when for most of us there's kind of that failure piece?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you tie that into this idea of we got married and it feels like a failure. There was a vow that was made, and for some, outside of your experience, it might perceive that the vow was broken in some way, or that there was a fault. Not giving grace to the fact that people are dynamic, relationships are dynamic. They're never the same as they were on the day we got married. When I work with couples who are entering marriage, I talk about their vows being like a roadmap, setting intentions. This isn't the law of what you're going to abide by forever. I'm bringing my best intentions to meet this relationship in this way, and let's continue to revisit it, and let them change and grow over the years that we're together. And if at some point it no longer works for us, then it's not a failure. And we can say that until we're blue in the face to people. But I would say that the most work that I've done with people who have experienced or are recently navigating separation and divorce is when they're in a new relationship, and all they want to feel is excited about this new relationship. And then there's the ghost of this past experience. There's like this unfinished business. And I would say that happens likely more often when people have made this public vow, this proclamation to be together until death do us part. And so my answer to your question is sort of two-part. I would say on the one hand, if you stepped into a marriage or a partnership through ritual, then I would strongly consider for people to move out of that also through ritual, whether that be as a couple consciously or as an individual witnessed by some of your closest friends, but to reset intentions, to sort of help bring some closure to that ritual experience in order to then be able to move on in a fresh way. The other thing I would say about that, the second part, is around this failure piece. And I think we're going to come back to this, I'm sure, during this interview, but this idea that as a society, we need to practice being with what's hard, expressing our hardest parts in safe environments, not just out there on the internet, but, cultivating those spaces where we can have real conversations about what we're navigating. And when we can do that, we hear from others and we don't feel so alone. And we realize, that everybody stumbles on the road, and we start to see how this person has picked themselves up after this particular experience. And we can start to kind of widen the view and not become so myopic on this one particular outcome that maybe we didn't choose or we never would have wanted, and start to get this broader view on life and how there's still a lot of life ahead to lead, and that what maybe for a period we considered a failure actually can present this opportunity to grow and expand in our living much more than we may have had we not ever been tested in this way or experienced loss. Like to then cultivate this capacity to love more deeply, to have more compassion, to give people more grace, because we've been there.
When you were saying that, I was thinking about how when you go through something, whether it's divorce, especially certain death losses,
Mm,
um, a lot of non-death losses and death losses, the lenses of your life change, right? I always say in thanatology, the assumptive world theory is everything kind of changes. So you put on different pair of glasses now. So when you've gone through type of a separation or divorce, the way that you view the world has changed, right?
mhm,
So that's just my thinking, that if people instead of people looking at it as a failure, look at it as in, I see the world differently now, but I've learned from that. And I think that the positive is that you have to learn from it, right? Or what? And another thing that came up too is um, how to rediscover yourself, right? Because sometimes in marriages, as you said in the beginning, it's kind of a pathway. Well, for some of these marriages, the clients I've talked to and people I've known over the years, they've kind of lost themselves.
mm,
And so maybe that's a reason why they don't feel very good about themselves, or
mhm,
that there's a, like, what legacy, Karla? Like, so it is a rebuilding too, as well as viewing the world in a different type of lens now, which is also can be extremely growth, a lot of growth there. I don't know
mhm.
if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know why this came to mind in particular, but I was speaking with someone recently who's navigating retirement, and who it was, thinking that she should be feeling this great excitement for this next chapter, but what she was feeling was this loss, and this, her identity's been so wrapped in up into it. So being able to um, honor, witness, welcome those feelings of loss before we can move on to something new, to welcoming a new chapter, is really important, whatever it might be. Obviously, retirement's very different from um, a separation, but this idea of, who am I without this relationship? Who am I without this job? Who am I without being the primary, you know, parent at home? Now maybe I'm a week on, week off, or whatever it might be. Um, so it is a process of discovery. And I think when we can slow down through any of those and not push away whatever mixed feelings are coming up, welcome them, we can start to get creative about how we can reinvent ourselves or rediscover ourselves. You use the word discovery, and I think that's really important. It's like coming back to who we are, essentially, without all of these labels of how we navigate the world.
Yeah, and another thing, I think you already brought this up, is the biggest concern or upset I've had over the years in working in this field is that, especially with non-death losses, is the lack of community support. There isn't a lot of community support for people that are in retirement. There isn't a lot of support for people going through divorce, or people struggling with infertility. So having such community as what you do, and you can tell us about that later, but is vital, because we know if support systems work so well, because then you're less isolated. So I just wanted to mention how important it is. Anyone's listening that's going through any of these things we're talking about, how important community is. It's vital, in my thinking and my feeling and my own life. I thought, when I've gone through really heavy times, support systems were essential.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And and I was speaking with someone recently who had struggled with addiction and was attending an addiction, like an anonymous addiction support group. And for a season that was helpful. And then they recognized when it was time to move on, because they felt like it was keeping them stuck in this narrative of addict, and they wanted to now embrace this different identity. So this is a bit of a tangent, but I guess where I'm going with this is thinking about community. And it's important that you find the right one, you find the right people, and you'll know, like, listen to your gut when you find the right people. I love intergenerational relationships. I love being with people who have been there, and they're years into the future from this terrible experience, whether it's the loss of a child, whether it's the end of a relationship, whether it's getting fired from a job, going bankrupt, whatever it might be, these things that at the time feel like the end of the world. And now they have perspective, they have wisdom from it. And they're not in the thick of it. They're not still speaking from the wound. They're speaking from the scar. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but so finding your people, I think, and you only really need one other person to be a witness, to be an unbiased witness, to maybe offer some wisdom. Of course, the more the merrier, but I'd much rather have a wise person in my corner than 30 people who keep me stuck in the mud.
I love that. And I also was thinking, when you talk to those older people that have wisdom, that have been through it, how much hope they can give. That this person that's going through whatever they're going through will know that they can navigate it. I have seen it in support groups all the time where we usually have a peer facilitator, and the peer has gone through it. And you put that person purposely there because then the others can look and going, they survived. Whether it's divorce, whether it's death, loss, whatever, but they look at that person. Well, if they can do it, how are they here? 8 years later, they're still walking. They're still laughing, right? So I do really like your point of that. And I also think you're right. Like, we don't need, not everybody wants a big village, right? Some people need that big village and some people just need that one. But I think we're both expressing the same thing, and that it is really important. But I do love the fact that you brought that transgenerational thing up. That's really important.
Yeah. Could I just say something about what you just said? I do agree that it's wonderful when you can have someone who's navigated a very similar journey. And some things, there's just no one who's, everything, every situation is unique. But you might not always have a person who's been on that road. And this is where I think this general societal, it's so important for us to cultivate as a society, the muscle to sit with what's uncomfortable. I love that you have this platform and you name non-death losses, and you're a thanatologist and a divorce and separation coach. You're like, that must be so affirming for people who come to you to think, yeah, this is a death in my life. And she gets it, but wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have the uncle who said, well, yeah, but the house and whatever. I don't know if that was before we started recording or not, but just, people minimizing these losses that feel so big. The more I think we can affirm a loss, start to normalize conversations around it. And when you're the person who's in it, I don't think you should bear the burden of having to be the one to do it necessarily. But this is sort of a general call out to everybody to kind of take some steps to cultivate that in your life. And there are different ways you can do it. But one of the things I like to do is just really tune in to, in a situation, where I'm going to try to think of an example. Like first family dinner after the end of a relationship, charged with emotion, maybe all of these things. Say you're hosting the first family dinner for your sister after her marriage has ended. And there's this, there's going to be this elephant in the room. So rather than not addressing it and making it bigger and having it take up all this emotional energy, maybe initiating a conversation ahead of time, opening the door for a conversation. And that takes courage, but it's like listening to these little nudges inside and trusting sometimes that we should speak these things, and then following their lead. Do they want to engage or not? It's a dance a bit, but I always think it's better to name the thing rather than let it take up all this emotional space as the elephant in the room that nobody wants to address. And it starts a conversation, um, we we build those muscles to be together. And then when it's the sister's turn to inevitably navigate some other crap storm in her life, that can be a safe person then to, it helps to knit these bonds in our communities even tighter when we can show up for each other like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a real problem in our society, is I don't think it's done very often. Uncomfortable things like grief or divorce, even death loss is not done well, in my Theontology opinion. I mean, we try, but society in North America don't do it as well as I would like. But I have my own personal story. Is I left my marriage of 19 years. It was not a good marriage. It was toxic. It took me courage to leave, and I went up north with my kids and my older sister and my younger sister. We were all together. And just as you explained that story about the elephant in the room, well, do you think it was ever talked about? It was a huge elephant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at one time they decided to play a song that was one of the big wedding songs of my, like in my wedding ceremony, right? And
Without thinking about it, or was that a choice they made? Oh my
without
gosh.
thinking about
Sorry for
it.
that.
So even though I left the marriage, I went outside and went to the front of the lake and was tearing up. And my daughters picked up on that, but my sisters didn't, right? So there's still a lot of unawareness there. I
Mm-hmm.
think society thinks, well, Karen chose to leave. There is no grief.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that comes up, okay? Because it's a choice. You chose to leave. There's no grief here. Well,
Right.
I'm telling you, listeners, and who's ever in my been like, if you left, there can be a lot of grief still.
Mm-hmm.
So that story you were saying, I went, oh, but I think it's so important you said it, because I think if anyone's listening and they know somebody going through this, because everybody knows someone that's gone through divorce. The rates are too high that you're going to know someone in your community or someone in your family or some of your friends or something. So if even a friend that can help bridge, right? Bring it up, feel the person out and state, I'm here for when you need, because a lot of times you're feeling all alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a really, you can sit within it. And as you said, like some people have nobody, um, but it's really hard sometimes to just do it all on your own.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Sorry, I had to breathe there. I was I was visualizing myself in that spot almost 9 years ago. So,
Wow.
but
I'm sure others will resonate with that. Will have experienced something very similar too.
and that goes back to me stating, I don't know if I did this before we started recording, about the disenfranchise of it all,
Mm-hmm.
right? Disenfranchise of that lady you're working with that's going through retirement. I've also worked a couple with that too, right? But it's like, oh, well, now you're going to have this great life. And then they're thinking, well, that's been my whole life for 40 years, right? Or um, divorce or whatever. So I'm kind of glad this has come up in this interview, actually.
Yeah. I think we need to get better at being awkward.
Mm.
Do you know Jacob Collier? Do you know who he is?
I've
He's a
heard of him, yeah.
musician. He's just a genius. And I love who he is. I love what he does with his music. But he said, I heard him say recently, everybody wants to be cool, but I want to be warm. Why be cool when you can be warm? And I thought, yeah, like lean in, open your heart, be the safe landing place for a person. Um, yeah, I think we could all get better at that.
I also think be okay with being uncomfortable.
Hmm.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the person that's dealing with the loss, but it's also uncomfortable for the person, right? Like you're uncomfortable. Maybe you have not been, we grew up and maybe we weren't exposed to a lot, or we were, um, like a lot of us, death talk or divorce talk wasn't talked about, right?
Mhm.
So take time. Not everybody are natural listeners, right, or natural givers, but there are things you can do to help people that are going through a hard time.
Mhm. I'm curious, do you find it's changing? Like, I think about when I grew up, I had one aunt and uncle that had divorced. And I'm now, hate to even admit this, but I kind of felt some shame. Like there's a divorce in my
Mhm.
family, which is so silly. But that's just what it was. You know, people would whisper like she's a divorcee, and it was just a taboo word. So I'm curious, with the higher rate of, divorce rates and all of that, like, is it still so taboo?
I think society doesn't taboo as much. From a divorced family in the 70s, and it was you're the broken family. So like you get to sit over there, right? So
Oh.
the broken family term is not used anymore as much. I really am thinking that's a terrible word because it's just, as some mediator I had on the podcast said, it's just rearranging your family,
Mhm,
right? Like instead of thinking it as this broken family, think of it as, we're rearranging and we're trying our best to rearrange it for the best of everybody, especially the kids, especially if it's high conflict, right? But
mhm,
yeah, I think there's a lot of self shame that's
mm,
still being carried, right? Um, I just want people to realize that for most people that go through divorce, it's never an easy decision. The
mhm,
decision is usually can be years in advance. Um, I actually read an article this morning that it's 70% still women that are deciding to end the marriage. So
mm,
and women carry the burden of that because women are supposed to be the glues that put everything together, right? We're the salt, we're the organizer, and then when we decide to break that foundation up, um, it's really guilt ridden too. So,
mm,
but it is gotten like, because divorce rates are so high and it is better, but it still has more to go. And there's a lot more resources, right? Like this podcast, right? Other coaches, whatever. Like there's a lot more support out there than there used to be. There's lots of
mhm,
YouTube videos. So that's been helpful.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, I still, when I went through my own, I called up my older sister and I said to her, um, I don't want you to be embarrassed about me. And this was just 8 years ago.
mm,
And I was getting my degree. It's not like I don't know where it came from, but even back then, eight
mhm,
years ago, I was embarrassed for myself.
mm,
So I think it still comes up from time to time
mm,
with people.
hmm.
Yeah.
Something I just thought of there about how your sisters didn't tune in necessarily to what was needed in that moment. This kind of circles back to the conversation on legacy. I think, in my work, this work that I do really started with a deep dive in end of life stuff, volunteering with hospice, hosting death cafes, training as a funeral celebrant, singing at the bedsides of the seriously ill and dying, this really deep dive into end of life. And I just witnessed how so much clarity can come at that time. If you haven't, so hopefully you cultivate that earlier in life, but often for people, that's where it becomes crystal clear, like who matters, what really doesn't matter anymore. And so this is the clarity that I try to bring into all of these other moments in life. It's like awareness of our mortality. This too shall pass, impermanence, all of this stuff, right? And that's how I try to live. And so this is how the legacy term and all of that kind of started to take shape. But I think about when communities, close family members, the people you would expect to be there the most for you sometimes surprisingly are not. And it's these other people who show up. Um, I think if we did enough digging, we could trace all of it back to fear of death, fear of, people talk about when a child dies, some people who they would expect to be there for them don't do it. And they think it's probably because, they're afraid, like, could this happen to me? I don't want my child. I don't even want to think about the possibility of how that could happen. Or, their marriage ended. Well, I need to like really hang on to this over here in mine. And it's like we have a fear of insecurity, fear of exile, fear of shame, fear of all these things that at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to die alone. That's getting a little philosophical, maybe, but I think we can loop it all in. So again, cultivating practice. And this is why I love that you also bring a thanatology lens to what you do. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, like all of these things will only help us in meeting this particular situation we find ourselves in: separation, divorce, family regrouping, identity discovery, all of that. And then down the road, as we continue to write our story. And people talk a lot about becoming a better person, becoming this and that. And I see it more as stripping away, getting back to who we truly are. And that's what death is. It's like none of this actually matters in the end. And so we're getting a little serious here now, but these are all opportunities. All these little deaths throughout our life are opportunities to just get closer and closer to what is essential for me, what is essential as I connect with other people. And it's a practice it'll ultimately help us meet, all those other losses we'll encounter in our lives.
So how do you help, if any of our listeners are right, wherever they are in this journey, separation or divorced, are the things that you work on with them, or is it more of a practical thing, like more of a doing thing, or is it community thing? Like I'm thinking when I work with grievers in divorce and death loss, it's really counseling, right? It's it's a lot of educational, a lot of certain tools, but what you do is different. And so I want you to describe to the listeners what you do, because I think it's important that they understand that this is also a really helpful thing.
Mm-hmm. I don't have a framework I walk someone through or a course that I sell, because I think everyone's situation is so unique, and it's only really in conversation that we can find out what would be the most helpful. I think for the last 10 years, most people have come to me for ceremony work. And it's usually not for separation and divorce. It's for one of the big 3 or 4: birth, death, marriage, baby. Because those are the ones in a largely secular society, or I would say most of my clients are secular or maybe spiritual, but not religious. Those are the things they still think about ceremony and ritual for. So sometimes a person will come to me and be kind of navigating a transition, not really sure what's needed. And then a personal ritual is very helpful. And again, it's not prescriptive. It's not like, well, here you go, I can pull this ritual down off the shelf. We get to what's meaningful for the person through story. So there's always story woven in. I'm working with a family right now who we're doing a memorial ceremony for the sort of patriarch of the family. And I know that it's so comforting to know immediately what this ceremony is going to look like, but we reverse engineer it and we start with story. And then once I get a sense of who the person was, as it can help to sort of inform all those different pieces. And at the same time, it's really a balm for the family to connect on these stories, to remember them as they were in their living, and to learn new things about their person that they didn't know because they're hearing it from someone else, So it really depends on if I'm working with an individual, a couple, a community, but story is essential. Ritual often comes in writing. I do help people sort of capture their life stories, integrate. Sometimes that's in community where they'll share stories. And again, it's this piece of you hear someone else's story, you gain an insight for your own. And being witnessed is so powerful in the telling of your story. Sometimes we can really get into ruts in the way that we see something. We talked earlier about this narrative of failure, but when you're writing it, when you're reading it, when you're hearing other stories, we start to reclaim that authorship for our own lives. So storytelling, ritual, and community. I don't know if you want me to talk here about the regular thing I have going on.
Yeah, sure. You can tell
Yeah.
everybody.
So, well, I would just say too, though, before I go too much into that, around community, in the ceremony and ritual piece, how important community is, even if it's very small and intimate. But being witnessed is such a powerful part of moving through a transition, and also acknowledging that you're not alone in this, that others are impacted, and that it changes, something's changing for them as well. So considering community, and not just as, this is a performance for them to watch. It's no, there's a participatory kind of element to it. And then I host twice a month on the second and fourth Thursday of every month. I host a call called The Heart of Being Human. It's a free community call. And it's kind of a two-part thing. Like for me, it's helping me to put language to what I do, because sometimes it can be tricky if somebody says, well, what is it? You just asked me the question, like, what exactly do you do with people? And it's like, well, it really depends on the person, because it's different every time. But then it's a chance for people to show up and have real conversations about what's on their heart, about what it is to be human in all its beauty and complexity and messiness. People who come have said, this is the only place I have these conversations, and I feel more safe sharing here than I do sometimes with the people that I see in my daily life. So it's actually a practical place to practice what we're talking about, this building this muscle, this capacity to sit with what's uncomfortable, to be present to another person, to be present to whatever's coming up for us. It's not therapy. I'm not a therapist, but it is definitely therapeutic. And it's, I don't show up with slides or something that I'm teaching. It's really just leading and demonstrating presence, witnessing artful questions and answers. And it's different every time, which makes it a great joy to be a part of. So I would welcome anybody who wants to join any of those calls. I'm sure you'll have the website probably in the show notes, I guess, heartofbeinghuman.com. It's free.
The title is amazing though, because it is the heart of being human, right? We are all going to go through a lot. I don't know anybody really that has not come, like, I've also done a lot of hospice and palliative and even my own parents' deaths and all that. And I have never met anyone that hasn't gone through some tough times. It just doesn't, that old term or cliche, no one comes out of here unscathed, right? Or we all are going to have worries and bigger worries and big events and small events that are going to need to be validated and heard. And I love the fact he said storytelling, because narrative therapy is essential. I love it. Not everybody wants to do it. I'd recommend any of our listeners to try it. Storytelling is a great way, but I love what you said there too about witnessing, right? Like it's beautifully said. And I encourage everybody to try to go to Karla's online events, because community can be extremely helpful, like really helpful. I was even thinking myself of joining that one you had before Christmas. I just had something that came up, but so you'll see me there. I really do want to go. I just haven't had time yet. But is there any advice that you want to give our listeners before I ask the last question?
No, I think I
No?
just want your last question.
Okay. So for someone who is just separated, whether they left or were left, what advice would you give them to help them navigate those overwhelming early days?
Well, I think I am not the expert in any person's life. So I think the best thing they can do is to tune into their own knowing. The answers are always within us. And sometimes it takes a guide to ask good questions. But I think as soon as someone starts sort of telling you this is the way it needs to be done, or this is the formula you need to follow, it's probably not the right guide. So in those early days, grace for yourself, I would say slowing down, not bypassing the feelings that are coming up. And I would say also just, even if it's super small, tuning into and tapping into a kind of sense of aliveness, something that brings you alive, that enlivens you. Doesn't even have to be joyful. Maybe it's like a beautiful piece of soothing music, or maybe it's, paying attention to the way the sunlight hits the floor, or maybe it's just watching your kids from afar as they play, or who knows, maybe it's going to the airport and watching the arrivals terminal. I don't know. Tuning into aliveness is like a reminder that life will go on, that there is this spark inside that might feel dim right now, but can be rekindled, and just, slowly building on that, tuning into that, I would say is the best advice I could give right now on the spot.
Beautifully put. So Karla, where can they get, can you just say your webpage and how they get in touch with you?
Yep. So my name is Karla with a K, and last name Combres, and my website is karlacombres.com. If you have an easier time remembering Heart of Being Human, just go heartofbeinghuman.com to sign up to be notified for those calls. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, kind of YouTube, but I wouldn't start there. And I'm available to work with people one-on-one or show up for some of these community calls. I think, like I said, it's really important that there be a fit, that there are people out there, whether they're people you hire to work with you or whether they're people in your community that are the right people at the right time. And I think you'll know it, you'll feel it. And so it's important that you tune into that. And it's worth listening to. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on, Karla. It was a great conversation. More awareness is needed, so that's why we do these things. So I'm so glad you came on, and thank you.
Thank you for doing this work. So important.
Thank you. Thanks for joining today's conversation with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guests, and don't forget to follow us on Spotify and our YouTube channel, divorceworkshop.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. And for a complete guide to navigating separation and divorce, check out the Just Separated workbook on Amazon. It covers emotions, co-parenting, finances, legal insights, and recovery. A must-have for anyone going through separation or divorce.